Hello everyone, welcome to r/nosleep. This is a subreddit full of spooky stories, and I felt like it would be good content for spooky month. It is currently 9:24 p.m. as of this recording. I do not know how long I'm going to go for, so I'm not good with intros, so let's just get right into it. With time, my sugar daddy asked me for weird favors. Just make sure it captures. Okay, I'm gonna zoom in just so it can be read easier. Hold on. There we go. Better. Anyways. His Tinder profile said he was 45, but he looked to be in his early 30s at most. Looking for a sugar baby, $700 weekly, no sex. It sounded too good to be true, but as a broke university student, I was willing to take my chances. I swiped right and Tinder let me know it was a match. His message came seconds later. Hey there, sweetheart, smiley face. I cringed at that word. I hated it, but $700 was $700, so I sucked it up and replied, hey, winky face. His name was Jack, and he told me he owned his business, although he never specified what kind of business it was. We talked for a while before he asked me for my Venmo to send me the first payment. After a few minutes, I got the notification. I stared at the $700 for at least 20 minutes, expecting to wake up from a dream at any second, but it wasn't a dream. You still there? I clicked on the message. Yeah, sorry, if you don't mind me asking, what are you looking for in return? I stared at the chat until he replied, I'm just looking for you to do a few favors for me. That sounded like it was going to be sexual to me. Like what? For example, the first thing I need you to do is pick up a delivery for me. That sounded innocent enough, but I was still expecting there to be some kind of twist. $700 to pick up a package? Come on, even I wasn't that naive. From the post office or something? No, I'll send you the address, but I'd rather not do this through Tinder. You got Kick? Or you can give me your number. Kick, what is this? What was this, 2011? I decided to give him my number instead, and he texted me the address immediately, followed by the address to his house, where I would have to drop out the package. I'm not home right now, but there's a key on the bottom of the blue flower pot near the door. Go inside and put the package on the coffee table in the living room. Make sure that you lock the door when you go inside the house and then lock it again when you leave. I grabbed my car keys and wallet and got into my car, putting the address into Google Maps. Got it, on my way. My phone buzzed as I backed out of my driveway. I'm serious. Lock the door both times, please. I thought that was a little excessive, but I promised him that I would. The house looked abandoned. It had a broken chain link fence around it, with a small door that was hanging on to dear life. It stuck out like a sore thumb, surrounded by houses that were a lot nicer than this one in comparison. You here for jack shit? I looked up to see a man standing in the open doorway of the house. He took up almost the entire space, his head skimming the top of the doorframe. He was huge in height and muscles, and his entire torso was covered in tattoos. Yeah, I guess, I replied, not moving from my spot on the sidewalk. Stay right there, he said. I did. I actually don't think I would have moved if he asked me to. I looked around and realized that there was no one else on the street. I was a 21-year-old woman alone in the street. I gripped my car keys. A few minutes later, the man came back out carrying a cardboard box. It was about the size of a shoebox, but stained and damped on some of the corners. Can you open your car? He asked. I opened the trunk, not wanting that inside of my car seats, and he set it in. Alright, there you go, he said. Thanks, I replied. I walked around to the driver's side of the car and opened the door. Oh, and one more thing, he said. I looked at him. Watch out, he said. I didn't reply. I blasted my music as I drove to Jack's house, hoping it would drown out my anxiety. It didn't. I parked my car in the stone driveway and stayed inside the car, admiring the house. It was a huge house, with stone pillars on the front porch and the greenest grass I had ever seen in my life. I turned the car off and got out. I grabbed the package and walked to the front door, getting the key from where he said it would be. I opened the door and stepped in, closing it behind me. I thought about what he had said about locking the door when I got inside. Wait, did he say that? I thought he... Oh, lock the door when you go inside. Okay. For some reason, I thought it was like, oh, like, unlock the door and then lock it when you leave. Okay. Sorry. I just had to reread that. I walked inside, my feet cushioned by the thick maroon carpet. Yeah, maroon carpet? What a weird carpet color. I admired the inside of the house. All the furniture was wooden and looked incredibly expensive. I would probably finish school a dozen times with the money that it took to furnish this place. I set the package down on the coffee table, and as I walked back to the door, I heard a phone ringing from somewhere in the house. I froze. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. I took it out to look. Don't answer any calls that aren't from Marvin. Who's Marvin? I put my phone back and followed the sound of the phone, poking my head into a few different rooms before I found it in an office. I walked over to the desk and looked at the caller ID. Incoming call from Jack. That was odd. I grabbed my phone to look at the message again. I was starting to get a little bit creeped out and decided I wouldn't answer just to be safe and left the house, remembering to lock the door as I left. I've done a few more favors for Jack since then. I drove a BMW to a random park in another city only to get out and drive a different car back to Jack's house. He had me meet one of his employees at lunch, who then gave me a briefcase to deliver to the first house I had gone to, and told me he would know if I looked inside. On several occasions, he asked me to drive down to that same house and stay with the guy, whose name was Julio, for a certain amount of time. In total, I've made around $3,500. Most recently, Jack asked me to stay in his house overnight. I woke up to a text message from him. I need you to spend the night at my house. I hadn't ever seen him in person, but I had talked to him on the phone a few times. He proceeded to tell me he would pay me $1,000 to spend the night at his house, provided that I followed a few rules. I drove to his house that evening. The driveway was empty and The driveway was empty and it normally was, but the porch light was on. I walked up, unlocked the door, went inside, and then locked it again. Everything in the house looked the same. Jack had told me over the phone that he would leave the list of the rules on the dining room table. I set all my stuff down in the living room. My bags looked like garbage compared to the fancy furniture in there. I wandered into the kitchen and then to the dining room. Sure enough, there was a piece of paper on the wooden table held down by an empty glass. Lock the door when you come in. Only answer calls from Marvin. Don't turn on any faucets between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. Don't open the door for anyone, no matter who they say they are, after 10 p.m. If the door to the closet at the end of the hall is open, sleep in the library. If closed, sleep in any of the bedrooms. The gardener comes at midnight. If he starts knocking on the windows, hide. Turn the TV on and let it play on static through the night. Do not forget to do this. Help yourself to anything in the fridge, smiley face. I'll pay you in the morning. Good night. I made sure to follow all the rules. To be honest, I was regretting my decision, but seeing as I was already here and I was getting paid, I decided to stay anyway. I figured as long as I followed all the rules, I'd be perfectly fine. Still, it felt a little odd. What was this, a haunted house? Nevertheless, I lounged around the house for a few hours, and as I was planning on going to sleep around 9, since that's the time that all the weird shit would begin to happen. At 8:50, I brushed my teeth using the... Oh, don't use any faucets. I was gonna say, aren't you supposed to not use the faucets at all? Using the faucets for the last time before 9. I checked the closet in the hallway, and upon seeing that it was open, I moved my stuff into the library and got ready to sleep on the couch. I locked the doors just in case and laid on the couch, scrolling through my phone. I hadn't gotten any more messages from Jack, and I started to think up scenarios and reasons as to why he had such strict, peculiar sets of rules in his house. I had dozed off at some point, because at exactly 10:16 p.m. I was woken up by the doorbell ringing. I was about to get up to check, but then I remembered the rule. Don't open the door for anyone, no matter who they say they are, after 10 p.m. I stayed on the couch, trying not to move, paranoid that they would hear even the slightest sound. It's the police, open up! I didn't move. Hello, it's the police, open up or we're coming in. I still didn't move, but I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Ba-doom, ba-doom, ba-doom. There was silence for a while after that. Then the doorbell rang again. Hey, it's Jack, let me in. It sounded like Jack. I thought you only got messages from him. Okay, but still, I didn't get up. He would have a key, wouldn't he? Why would he need me to let him in? This continued for almost a full hour. Different people would ring the doorbell, announce themselves, and then disappear when I didn't respond. I was finally able to fall asleep and the gardener never came. When I woke up the next morning, I heard someone in the kitchen. I got up slowly and unlocked the door as quietly as possible, taking my phone with me, and walked across the living room and into the kitchen. I stopped at the entrance and peered in. It was Jack. He was standing in front of the stove, stirring something as the coffee machine brewed coffee on the counter behind him. Wait, I just realized something. You got up slowly and unlocked the door as quietly as possible. What door? I'm not going to go back and look. Hey, good morning, he said when he saw me. Hi, I replied, nervous. I hadn't seen him in person before, but he looked exactly like his pictures online. Scrambled eggs? He asked, motioning to the pan with a wooden spoon. Yeah, thanks, I replied, walking over to take the plate from him. I ate my breakfast and drank some coffee in silence. Are you getting drugged? So, how was it? He asked. It was okay, nothing super freaky happened, I replied. Cool, he replied. There was an awkwardness in the room. I think I'm gonna go now. I have class, I trailed off. I didn't, but I really wanted to get out of there. Oh no, yeah, sure. I'll talk to you some other time, he replied. I grabbed my stuff and he walked me to my car. I could see him standing in the driveway, staring at me as I left. Uh-oh. When I got home, I unpacked all my stuff and noticed that I still had the list with me. I sat on my bed and read it again. I felt my body tense up as I realized that I had forgotten something. Turned the TV on and let it play on static through the night. Do not forget to do this. Uh-oh. I stared at the words on the page until they lost meaning. Besides me, my phone buzzed, snapping me back to reality. It was the $1,000 payment. I looked at my phone and then back at the list. Maybe it wasn't an important step? As I was thinking this over, a text from Jack came in. I'm not in town right now. I should be back next week. So you're free from running any more errands for me until then. Just sent the payment. Go do something fun. I stared at the message and read it again, and once more for good measure. I'm not in town right now. I thought back to this morning and how Jack was in his house, how he gave me breakfast. I'm not in town right now. Within minutes, a new text came in, this time from a number that I didn't recognize. Did you forget to do something? The text was followed by a picture of Jack, or whoever this version of Jack was, standing in front of the TV. I didn't respond. Next came another picture. This one was outside of my house. It was followed by another text. Watch out. There's a part 2 apparently. There we go. I don't know how many parts there is. I didn't leave my house for almost an entire week. The only reason I didn't stay indoors for longer is that I had an important exam in one of my classes that I absolutely had to be present for. That also didn't help with the anxiety I was feeling. As I drove to campus, I kept my eyes glued to my surroundings, almost running 2 stop signs and a red light. I kept expecting Jack, or fake Jack, I suppose, to pop out randomly on the side of the road, or in the car next to me, or the car behind me. I constantly glanced at my rearview mirror, trying to figure out if the black truck behind me had been there this whole time, or if it was different than the one I had seen 10 minutes ago. I hadn't told him where I went to school, so maybe he wouldn't know. Then again, I hadn't told him where I lived either, and he seemed to figure that one out rather quickly. I hadn't texted the real Jack since the incident had happened. I mean, I didn't even know what I was supposed to say. Oops, I didn't follow all your rules, and now there's a weird lookalike of yours running around the city. My plan, as foolish as it was to act as if all was well. I wasn't going to stir the pot by telling him I had already fucked up, so instead I was going to wait until he realized that something was wrong. Hopefully he wouldn't. I will admit that not telling him was more difficult than I had thought, and I found myself constantly checking my phone for text from Jack, but none appeared. I finished my exam that day, sure that I had failed due to my lack of focus, and drove back home where I found Julio standing in my driveway. He was looking down at his phone, and I attempted to keep driving down the street before he saw me, but I wasn't fast enough. He glanced and began walking towards my car as I slowly pulled into the driveway, locking my doors and trying to remain calm. Instead of shifting into park, I kept my foot on the brake and shifted into reverse, fully ready in case I needed to make a quick getaway. I sat in the driver's seat looking forward at my front door. I wondered for a second if I would be able to get inside and lock the door before Julio got to me. Suddenly, he leaned down and knocked on the window, making me jump. I turned to look at him and said nothing. "Roll your window down," he said, motioning for me to lower the window. I pressed the button for a split second, making only a tiny crack of open space. "You know, it's not me you should be afraid of." I looked at him and glanced at my rearview mirrors, trying to see if any of my neighbors were outside, but they weren't, and I was alone with no witnesses. "You fucked it up," he said, leaning against my car. "I told you to watch out, and you didn't. You managed to fuck up the rules in one night. They always miss at least one." "They?" I looked up at him, but said nothing because I honestly had no clue what to say. "Get out of the car. We're going inside." He tapped his hand on the roof of my car and walked towards my front door. I thought about driving away, but I wasn't sure where I would go, and a part of me wanted to hear him out, so I found myself parking the car, turning off the engine, and letting Julio into my house. He took a seat on my couch and glanced around my living room. "This is fancy for a college student. You buy this with Jack's money?" he asked. I rolled my eyes as I stood in front of him. "Why did you want to come in?" "All right, touchy subject," he said, shrugging. "I need to talk to you about Jack." "Which Jack? The one I've been talking to, or the one who appeared in the house?" "What?" he snapped, leaning over and resting his elbows on his knees. "What? What do you mean, the one who appeared in the house? Jack isn't back yet. I came here to tell you that you forgot to lock the door after your little house-sitting gig, which Jack won't be pleased about. He's very particular about his stuff. He's gotten rid of girls for much pettier shit than this." I said nothing and stared at Julio while he stared back, waiting for me to explain myself. His use of the words "gotten rid of" made me nervous, and I wondered what he meant by that. Surely he wouldn't kill me over a mistake, right? "Was there someone else in the house?" he asked after a few seconds of silence. Jack? Jack was in the house that morning before I left." "How do you suppose that happened? Because Jack hasn't come back from his trip yet." I shrugged, not really knowing what to say. Julio stood up, sighing in annoyance. "Fine, you know what? I originally came over to ask you for a share of the cash you got for your poor house-sitting job, but it seems to me that you probably fucked up more than I originally thought, so I'm just going to stay out of whatever this is. Good luck." He walked over and opened my front door, waving to me as he left, leaving me standing in my empty house. I ran to the door and locked it as soon as he was gone, and started to freak out once again. I thought about what I was going to do if Jack came back from his trip and found out that I had messed up. What if Julio was right and someone had broken into the house and robbed him? Maybe I just thought I saw Jack? Maybe it was just some other stranger who looked like him. My mind was going a mile a minute as I tried to figure out what to do. I paced around my house for a few hours before I finally decided that I was going to drive back to Jack's house and make sure that no one had broken in. Bad idea. If they had, I would simply make an anonymous police report or something. Besides, the only way he would ever know that it was my fault would be if Julio snitched on me, which it didn't seem like he was planning on doing anymore. I made the drive over in silence. Still, bad idea. Trying to control my breathing so that I didn't have a meltdown on the highway, I finally pulled into the driveway and turned the engine off, but I couldn't work up the courage to get out of the car. I sat there for a few minutes, staring at the giant house, trying to force myself to unbuckle my seatbelt, open the door, and get out of the car. The house, which once looked impressive, now made me feel anxious and out of place. I couldn't stop myself from imagining all sorts of horrible scenarios that I could stumble upon once I opened the door. I thought about how many possible hiding places there were in a house that large. I don't know how long I sat there before I finally decided to get out of the car and walk towards the front door. I hesitated for a few seconds before taking a deep breath and pushing the door open, only it didn't open because it was locked. I assumed that Julio had probably locked it and looked for a key on my keychain. I unlocked the door and stepped into the living room, taking a look around. Oh no. Everything looked normal though. There were no signs of breaking and entering or anything like that, and I was glad that Julio had come over and realized my mistake before someone else had. I closed the door behind me, this time double checking that I locked it, and began to make my way further into the house. Why are you going further into the house? Why? Like, you're so anxious. It's like, I don't know. Let's keep going. I went into the library first, which looked the same as it had when I left it. Next, I made my way through the living room, glancing around to see if anything was out of place, but nothing was. I was starting to feel better now that I had confirmed that no one had broken in and ruined the place. That feeling was short-lived, however, when I walked into the kitchen. Oh no. It was a complete mess. Both the fridge and the freezer were wide open, all the containers of food emptied out. There were empty boxes of frozen foods tossed inside the freezer and on the kitchen floor. There were a few trays of meat that were laying out on the table and the counters, and some of the red juice from the meats had been spilled inside the fridge and now dripped onto the floor. Why do I have a feeling whatever that fake Jack was has a craving for, like, meat? Or, like, flesh or whatever. I noticed that while there hadn't been much food in there in the first place, it was all gone. As I got closer to the fridge, I realized that it wasn't cool and the light inside the fridge wasn't working either. I assumed that whoever ate all the food also unplugged it for some odd reason. I stepped over an empty carton of orange juice and an empty crate of eggs as I made my way towards the stove, where I found stacks of unwashed pans. One of them was still hot, meaning that it was only recently taken off the burner. There were eggshells all over the counter, and I thought back to that morning when Jack, or whoever that was, had made eggs for breakfast. I walked back out of the kitchen, careful not to step on the mess that littered the floor, and made my way down the hallway. I spotted the door at the end of the hallway, and this time it was closed. As I continued to walk down the hall, I couldn't help but notice how eerily quiet it was in the house. Again, I don't like this. I couldn't even hear the sound of the heater running. As I passed the thermostat in the hallway, I saw that it wasn't working. The screen was off and there was nothing on it, like it had been turned off or something. I leaned forward and pressed a few of the buttons, but none of them worked. I poked my head into the study, but that was also empty. Although I did see that the landline had been used recently and whoever used it didn't put it back. The handheld part was hanging off the side of the desk, and I stepped in, grabbing the phone and holding it up to my ear, but there was only silence. I put it back and followed the cord with my eyes. I saw the rest of that. It was connected to the wall, but it seemed like there was no power in the house, which explained the refrigerator and the thermostat. I walked out of the study and headed down the hall again, but I froze in my tracks when I noticed that the door at the end of the hall was open now. Someone was in the house. I reached into my back pocket and grabbed my phone, checking to see if maybe I had missed a text from Jack, but I had no signal inside the house. I held my phone in my hand, hoping I'd pick up enough signal to call for help, and began to back away from the door, listening carefully for any footsteps or noises that would let me know where the intruder was. As I spun around, I found myself face to face with Jack, or whoever it was that I was looking at. I knew he was the same man that I had seen that morning, but I had no idea who he really was. "Sorry," I said, startled. "Which one are you?" he asked, squinting at me. He was dressed in a stained gray t-shirt and old pajama bottoms that looked like they had been purchased 30 years ago. "What?" I asked. "You're the new one, right? The one from the other day? You're the one who forgot to turn the television on." "Yeah, I'm so sorry. I thought I was being careful. I didn't mean to." I stopped talking as he started laughing. "Sorry," he asked, grinning. "I should be thanking you." "Who are you?" I asked him. I stared at his face and he looked exactly like Jack, but I couldn't figure out why he was here when he said he was still on his trip. "I'm Jack," he replied as if he was stating the obvious, but Jack said he wouldn't be back for a few days. His expression changed and he narrowed his eyes at me. "Did he tell you when he would be back? The exact date?" I shook my head, confused, and thinking about how I was going to get past this man and get out of this damn house. "But you can ask him, right?" I don't know. He hasn't contacted me in a few days. Damn it, I was hoping it wouldn't be that bad. "Can you explain to me what the hell is going on?" I asked him. "You shouldn't have come back here." Something felt off to me and chills shook my entire body. Part of me regretted not going with my original plan of acting like everything was okay. I didn't want to stay in the house any longer, and there was really nothing that I could do anyway. Besides, I was getting a bad feeling from this guy claiming to be Jack. I slowly stepped past him, glancing back behind me as I continued to walk into the living room and towards the front door. I found myself walking faster and faster until I was basically running and throwing myself at the front door. I couldn't help but shake the feeling that something bad was going to happen if I stayed in this house any longer. I unlocked the door, but just as I was about to open it, I heard the lock slide back into place, only it sounded a lot louder than usual. I don't like that. I jiggled the doorknob and realized that while the doorknob wasn't locked, something else was, and it was keeping me from opening the door. I began to freak out as I pulled on the door urgently, trying to get it to open, but something was keeping it shut. "What the fuck?" I said out loud. I glanced towards the hall as I heard another noise, but I quickly realized that it was the sound of air flowing through the vents. It seemed like the power was back, and somehow some sort of security system had activated at the same time. I looked down at my phone, and not only did I have a signal now, but I also had 3 messages from Jack. "I'm back. What happened? I know you're in the house." I looked around the room trying to find him or any security cameras in the room that would be alerting him of my presence in the house. I didn't see any and grabbed my phone to text him back. "Are you here?" I held my phone in my hands as I made my way back towards the hallway to find the other Jack that I had seen earlier. If he even was another Jack, maybe this was all the same person and he was just messing with me for some reason. A part of me thought that perhaps I deserved all of this for doing all of this in the first place. I mean, why was I so quick to agree to run random errands for a random man that I had never met? Sure, I needed the money, but going into a stranger's house has got to be on the list of the top 10 dumbest things you can ever do. Yes, especially considering the fact that no one knew where I was and I didn't have a weapon to defend myself if I needed to. Well, that's your fault. I stood in front of the closed door for a second before making my way over to a window. I tried to open it, but the security system had locked the window shut as well. That's dumb. I thought about breaking the window open and I grabbed a sturdy-looking vase. I took a few steps back and then threw it at the window as hard as I could. The vase shattered as it made contact with the window glass, but the window was fine, unscratched. The only way I was getting out of here was through the door, but first I had to disarm the security system somehow. I walked back to where I had left Jack, but he was gone and nowhere to be found. "Jack?" I called, my voice echoing throughout the house. The door at the end of the hall was closed once again, and I began to walk towards it, peeking into each room as I passed it, but there was no one else in the house. As I reached the door, my phone buzzed in my hand. "You were supposed to follow the rules." I stood in front of the door, trying to work up the courage to open it and see what was in the room. "I know, I'm sorry. I came back to make sure everything was okay." I reached out and grabbed the doorknob, taking deep breaths. The buzzing in my hand startled me, and I ignored it as I turned the doorknob and pulled the door again. What are you doing? Dumb decision after dumb decision. I stood in the threshold at the top of a wooden staircase. Below it was a badly lit basement. Oh no. I slowly walked down the stairs, glancing at my phone. "You should have stayed away. You're really going to regret this." I didn't reply and kept walking until I was at the bottom of the stairs. While I wasn't sure what I was expecting, it was the normal-looking basement apartment that I had stumbled into. I found Jack sitting on the couch against one of the walls. He was reading a magazine and glanced up when he heard me step off the stairs. "What are you doing?" He shot to his feet as he shouted to me. "The door locked and I can't get out," I replied. "You're so fucking stupid," he exclaimed, walking over to me. That's rude. How was I supposed to know the doors would lock when the power came back on? You weren't supposed to come back, he shouted, his face turning an angry shade of red as he yelled. I wanted to make sure everything was fine, I replied. Who cares? You got $1,000 for house sitting. Why didn't you take it and leave? Why are you so angry? Why are you even here? You're clearly not Jack, I snapped, annoyed. How do you know? He asked in a calmer tone. What? How do you know I'm not Jack? I look like the pictures you've seen, don't I? Yeah, but Jack is on vacation, I replied. How do you know? He repeated. What are you talking about? Have you even met Jack in person? Have you ever talked to him on the phone, video call, anything other than the text message every few days? I didn't reply, staring at him. He was right. He did look exactly like the photos I had seen on the Tinder profile. That's what I thought, he replied to my silence. What are you saying exactly? I asked as I heard my phone buzz once again. How do you know that the person you've been talking to is a real person? As a matter of fact, how do you know that it's not me? Maybe this was my plan all along, to lure you here. At that point, it finally hit me. He was right. I didn't know if I was talking to a real person. All that I was doing random favors for someone with an internet profile who wanted to pay me money to do these things for some reason. I guess I had always felt that there was something off about a sugar daddy who is willing to pay someone to do things other than having sex with them, but I needed the money too badly to spend too much time questioning it. I was feeling even more scared now, and my palms were cold and sweaty as I stood there, waiting for him to do something. I could run back upstairs, but I didn't think I was fast enough to get out of there and find something to jam the door and keep him downstairs. I took a shaky deep breath as I tried my hardest not to make it seem like I was scared. If Jack was dangerous, I didn't want to alert him of my plans to try and run. After a few seconds of silence, I glanced down at my phone to read the most recent text, but there weren't no new notifications. That wasn't your phone, Jack said, breaking the silence. I looked up at him and glanced at the phone sitting on a nearby table. Suddenly, he jumped towards me and I attempted to jump out of the way, but I was too slow. I saw Jack grab my arms and my phone fell out of my hands and then everything went black. When I came to, I was on the living room couch and Jack was standing above me looking down. What happened? I asked. I attempted to sit up, but I noticed that I was incredibly dizzy and my left arm felt sore when I tried to prop myself up. Oh no, were you drugged? I remembered Jack grabbing me earlier and I figured he had gripped my arm too tight and must have bruised it in the process. You're finally up. Good, he said. I slowly managed to sit up, wincing as I put weight on my left arm. I looked up at Jack, who was now standing a few feet away with a bandage wrapped around his right bicep. What happened? I asked, looking at the bandage, noticing there was blood seeping through. You really shouldn't have come back. I tried to shift my position on the couch and winced in pain as I put weight on my left arm again. I turned to look at it, trying to see if I had injured it somehow, and noticed that it was also wrapped in a bandage similar to Jack's. What happened? I repeated, looking down at my arm. I slowly reached out over and started to unwrap the bandage until it came off and I was left staring at crudely done stitches on the inside of my bicep. What the fuck is this? I snapped, looking at Jack. Sorry, Ivy, but you really shouldn't have come back. Although I'm glad you did. Oh, I'm kind of glad you did. I didn't really want to do this, but I need to get out of here. He began to back away from me, heading towards the front door. I watched as he easily opened it and wondered how he disabled the lock and if he had been the one to activate it in the first place. He stepped out of the door and turned back to look at me. Good luck. I helped you out a bit while you were out, he said, motioning towards my phone, which he had set down on the couch next to me. I stood up and went after him. Surprisingly, he didn't try to run or back up and simply stood about a foot away from the front door watching me. As I attempted to step outside, a stabbing pain erupted in my left arm, traveling throughout the rest of my body until I felt like I was being stabbed everywhere at once. I fell to the floor crying out in pain. Once I was back in the house, the pain went away and I laid on the floor shaking in the aftermath as I stared up at Jack. What did you do to me? I asked. I had to get out. It's been 8 months. I'm sorry, you were just the first one to come back this time. I'm sure you're a good person, but I'm sorry, I can't be here. You're just going to leave me here? Julio will come by to give you food. By the way, don't try to cut that thing out of your arm. This place is covered in cameras. If you do anything suspicious, Julio will see you and he won't hesitate to stop you. I learned that the hard way." I didn't know what to say, and I stood there in shock as I watched Jack walk over to my car and get in it, starting the engine and disappearing down the street. I finally shut the front door and locked it, turning back to face the empty house. I glanced at my phone, which was still on the couch, and remembered what Jack said before he left me. I walked over, trying not to move my arm too much as I picked it up and turned it on. My Tinder profile was open, only it had been changed, and now my profile bio read, "Looking for a sugar baby, $700 weekly, no sex." On the table next to it, there was a list of house sitting rules similar to the ones that I had found on the day that I had been there. At the bottom of the page, there was a lime green sticky note that read, "Sorry, I hope you're able to get out soon. Don't worry, maybe you won't be here for long. They almost always forget one of the rules. Good luck, Jack." Interesting stuff. Like, that was just, like, bad decision making 101. It's like, it's like, stay at my house for the night. Yeah, that sounds too good to be true. And then, like, you forget to do something, and then you get all paranoid, and it's like, I'm gonna go back to the house. One where you, been told, it's like, oh, you fucked up, you might not want to go back. It's like, what is wrong with you? Terrible stuff. Anyways, that's story number 1. That took me over half an hour to read. Jesus. Anyways, I'm not going to do a series just because I don't want to keep reading these, so I apologize. You can go read them for yourself. Something walks whistling past my house every night at 3:03. Every night, no matter the weather, something walks down our street, whistling softly. You can only hear it if you're in the living room or the kitchen when they walk by, and it always starts at exactly 3:03. The sound starts faint, somewhere near the beginning of the lane near the Carson place. We're towards the middle of the street, so the whistling moves past us before fading away in the distance of the cul-de-sac. When I was younger, my sister and I would sneak into the kitchen some nights to listen. Mom and Dad didn't like that, and we'd catch hell if they found us out there, but they were never too hard on us since we always stuck to one big rule. Don't try to look at whatever was whistling. My neighborhood is a funny place. I've lived here since I was 6 and I love it. The houses are small but well kept, good sized yards, plenty of places to roam. There are a lot of other kids here my age. I turned 13 back in October. Hey, it's October now. We grew up together and would always play foursquare in the cul-de-sac or roam around from back porch to back porch in the summer. This was a good place to grow up. I'm old enough to see it, and there's only the 2 strange things here, the night whistling and the good luck. The whistling never bothered me much. Like I said, I couldn't even hear it from my bedroom, but Mom and Dad don't like talking about it, so I've stopped asking questions. My dad is a strong guy, tall and calm. He has an accent since he moved to the US as a kid. His family, my grandparents, they're from the islands. That's what they call it. My dad, the only time he isn't so calm is if the whistler comes up. He talks a little quicker then, even eyes move faster, and he tells us not to think about it so much and to always remember the one rule, the big rule. Don't try to look outside when the whistler goes past. Don't look outside. Not that we could even look even if we wanted. See, there are shutters on the inside of every window, thick pieces of heavy canvas that pull down from the top and latch to the bottom of the window frame. Each latch even has a small lock about the size of what you'd find on a diary. My dad locks those shutters every night before we all go to bed and keeps the key in his room. My mom, I don't know what she thinks about the whistling. I've seen her out in the living room before at 3:03 when the sound starts. I can see her if I crack my door open just an inch to peek. She's not out there often, at least I haven't caught her much, but once or twice a month I think she sits out there on her big red couch just listening. The whistler has the same tune every night. It's cheerful. Da 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 dum, da 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 dum. I think that's the rhythm. Remember how I said there are two odd things about where I live? Well, besides our night whistler, everyone in my neighborhood is really lucky. It's hard to explain, and Dad doesn't like talking about this part much either, but good things just seem to happen to people around here a lot. Usually it's small things, winning a radio contest, or getting an unexpected promotion at work, or finding some arrowheads buried in the yard. You know, the authentic kind. The weather is pretty good and there's no crimes and everybody's gardens bloom extra bright in the fall. A million little blessings I've heard my mom say about living here, but the main reason we stay here, why we moved here in the first place, is my sister Nola. Hey, I have a coworker named Nola. She was born very sick, something with her lungs. We couldn't even bring her home when she was born, only visit her in the hospital. She was so small, I remember, small even compared to the other babies. A machine had to breathe for her. We moved into our house here to be closer to the hospital. As soon as we moved here, Nola started getting better. The doctors couldn't figure it out. They chalked it up to whatever they were doing, but we could all tell they were confused. But my parents knew, even I knew, Nola getting better was just another of the million little blessings we got living in our neighborhood. So that's why we stayed even after we found out that for every small miracle that happens here every day, now and then some bad things happen. But they only happen if you look for the whistler. See, our neighborhood has a welcoming committee. They show up with macaroni casserole in a gift basket in a manila folder. Whenever someone new moves in, they're very friendly. 4 people showed up when we moved in 7 years ago. The committee made small talk, gave me a Snickers bar, and took turns holding Nola. It was her first week out of the hospital, so they were extra careful. Then the committee asked to speak to my parents in private, so I was sent to my room where I still managed to hear nearly every word. The welcoming committee told my parents about how nice the neighborhood was, really exceptionally hard to explain kind of nice. Then they told my parents about the even harder to explain whistling that happened every morning at 3:03 and ended at the tick of 3:05. The group, our new neighbors, warned my parents that the whistling was quiet, would never harm or hurt us as long as we didn't look for whatever was making that sound. This part they stressed, and I pushed my ear into the door straining to hear them. People who went looking for the whistler had their luck changed. Sometimes tragically, a black cloud would hang over anyone that looked. Anything that could go wrong would. The manila envelope the committee brought over contained newspaper clippings, stories about car crashes and ruined lives, public deaths, and freak accidents. Not everyone dies, I heard the head of the committee tell my dad, but the light goes out of them. Even if they live, there's no light in them ever again, no presence. My mom, I could tell she wasn't taking it seriously. She kept asking if there was some prank they play on new neighbors. At one point, my mom got angry, accused the committee of trying to scare us out of our new home, asked them if they were racist on account of my dad being from the islands. My dad calmed her down, told her he could tell our new neighbors were sincere and they were just trying to help us. He explained that he grew up hearing these kinds of stories from his mom and that he knew there were strange things that walked among us. Really? 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 Some of those strange things were good, and some were bad, but most were just different. After the committee left, Dad went out to the hardware store, bought the canvas blinds, the latches, and the locks, and installed them on every window in the house after dinner. That first night in our new house, I crept out of my room at 3 a.m., only to find my dad awake, sitting on the living room couch, holding my baby sister. My dad held up his finger in a shh motion, but patted the couch next to him. I sat and we waited. At exactly 3:03, we heard the whistling. Da 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 dum da 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 dum da dum. Whatever. It came and it went, just like our neighbor said. The whistling returns each night, and we never look, and we enjoy our million little blessings every day. Nola breathes on her own, and she's grown into a strong, clever girl. My dad even joined the welcoming committee. We don't get new neighbors often. Why would anyone want to leave? But when a new family moves in, my dad and the committee bring them macaroni casserole, a gift basket, and the manila folder. I can always tell by the look on my dad's face when he comes back if the family took the committee seriously or if we'd be getting new neighbors again very soon. Not long ago, a family moved in directly next to us. The previous owner, Miss Maddie, passed away at age 105. Wow, that's really long. Good life. Yeah, she lived a good long life. Our new neighbors seemed like they fit in just fine. They believed the welcoming committee, took my dad's advice about the locking shutters since they had a young child of their own. Whatever newspaper clippings were in that manila envelope, whatever evidence, my dad never let us see, but I imagine it must be awfully convincing since our neighbors got along with no issues for the first month. One night, when our new neighbors had to leave town, they sent their son, Holden, to stay with us. He was 12, a year under me in school. I didn't know him well before that night, but as soon as his parents dropped him off after dinner, I could tell it was going to be a bad time. "Do you know who is always out there whistling every night?" Holden asked the moment the adults left the room. The three of us were sitting in the den, some Disney movie playing idly on the television. My sister and I exchanged a glance. "We don't talk about that," I said. "I think it's the weirdo that lives in the big yellow house on the corner," Holden said. "Mr. Tolles?" my sister asked. "No way, he's really nice." Holden shrugged. "Must be a psycho killer then." Nola tensed. "We don't talk about it," I repeated. "Let's go in my room and play Nintendo." We spent the next few hours playing games, eating popcorn, and then watching movies. A typical sleepover, but I could see Holden was getting antsy. After my parents had wished us a good night, locked the blinds, and gone to bed, Holden stood up from his beanbag and walked over to where Nola and I were sitting on my bed. "Have you ever even tried looking? It's nearly time." Like most sleepovers, we conveniently ignored any suggestion of a bedtime. I was shocked to see he was right. It was almost 3 a.m. I sighed. "We don't... See, I can't even try to look because my dad locks the blinds every night and hides the key," he continued, ignoring me. "So does our dad," said Nola. No, he doesn't." "You saw him do it," I said, a little sharper than I meant to sound. Holden grinned. "Your dad locks the blinds, yeah, but he doesn't hide the key. He keeps it right on his normal keychain." "So?" I asked, worried I already knew what he would say next, because I had noticed that my dad didn't bother hiding the key anymore after all these years, because he knew we took it seriously. "So, after your dad locked up, but before your parents went to bed, I went to the bathroom, and on my way, I may have peeked into the room, and I may have seen your dad's keys chains on his nightstand, and I maybe went and borrowed the key to blinds." Nolan and I stared, and his grin only grew wider. "You're lying," I said. Holden shrugged. "You can check if you want. Just open your parents' door and look, and you'll see his keychain right there on the nightstand." "Stay here," I told both of them. "Don't move a muscle." I hurried over to my parents' room, but hesitated at the door. If Holden wasn't lying, my dad would be angry, beyond angry. I was scared thinking about it, but more scared of an open window with the whistler right outside. I opened the door barely an inch and looked in, but it was too dark to see. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the room. 2 steps into the dark, I froze. The whistling started, and I could hear it clearly from my parents' room. I never realized, but they must have heard the sound every night since we moved into the house. They never told us. I don't think I could have slept through it. I stood there, listening to the whistling coming closer, unsure whether I should turn on the light or call out for my dad. "Call out for your dad, duh!" Soft sounds from the living room brought me back to reality. "Nola!" I yelled, running out of my parents' room. Holden and Nola were standing near the front door next to a window. Holden wasn't lying. I could see him fumbling with the lock on one of the blinds. I heard a click. He did have the key. Holden let out a quick laugh. Nola stood right next to him, hunched up, afraid but maybe curious. The whistling was right outside our house now. Bad? Why? Dumb kid. I think I made a sound, called out. I can't remember. Time felt frozen, clock hands nailed to the face. But I found myself moving. I'm not fast. I've never been athletic. Somehow, though, I covered the space between myself and Nola in a moment. My eyes were locked on her, but I heard Holden pull the blind all the way down so it could release. I heard the snap of it start to raise, and I heard the whistling just on the other side of the window. Ugh. But I had my arms around Nola, and I turned us so she was facing away from the window. At the same time, I jammed my eyes shut. The blind whipped open. The whistling stopped. I felt Nola shaking my arms. Don't look, okay? I told her. Don't turn around. We were positioned so that she was facing back towards the hallway and I was facing the window. My eyes were still closed. I felt her nod into my shoulder. I reached out with the arm, not holding Nola, and tried to touch Holden. My hand brushed against his arm. He was shaking worse than Nola. Holden? I asked. Silence. I reached past him and gingerly felt for the window, eyes still sealed shut. The glass was cold against my fingertips, colder than it should have been for the time of year. I moved my hand up to the window, searching for the string to the blind. The glass began to get warmer the further I reached, and there was a gentle hum feeding back into my fingertips. I don't like that image in my head. I tried not to think about what might be on the other side of the window. Finally, I touched the string and yanked the blind shut. I opened my eyes. In the dim light leaking out from the kitchen, I could make out Holden, pale and small, staring at the now closed window. Holden? I asked again. He turned towards me and he screamed. Everything became a flurry of motion. Lights sparked to life in the hall, then the living room. My parents' footsteps thudded across the hardwood floor. I didn't turn to look back at them, and my eyes were glued to Holden. He was pale, had bit his lips so hard that there was a thin red line of blood running down his chin, and he'd wet himself. What happened? My dad asked from behind me. I managed to swivel away from Holden and look back. He looked. I've never seen my dad scared, but I saw it that night, in that moment, an old, ugly terror stitched on his face. A parent's fear. Just Holden? He mouthed to me. I nodded yes. My dad let out a breath. He looked so relieved I nearly expected him to cheer, but then he turned to Holden and my dad's face changed. I wonder if he felt bad for feeling good, that Holden was the only one that looked. There was a knock at the door. We all froze. Holden whimpered. Don't answer it, my mom said. She stood at the threshold of the hall. I'd always thought she was a skeptic and just humored my dad about the windows and the whistler, but that night we were all believers. I noticed that both of my parents held baseball bats they must have taken from the bedroom. The knock came again, a little louder this time. Please don't open the door, Holden whispered. My dad walked over to him, hugged him close. We won't, my dad promised, still holding his bat. Nothing is coming in here tonight. This time the knocking was loud enough to rattle the door. Holden screamed again, and Nola clutched her arms around my neck. My mom came over and knelt down next to us, wrapping my sister and me close. Call the police, my mom whispered to my dad. The knocking instantly stopped. My dad looked over his shoulder at us. Do you think? He was cut off by frantic knocking that trailed off to a polite tap-tap. Police, something said from the other side of the door. The voice from outside sounded exactly like my mom, like a parrot repeating the words back to her. Please, call the police. Please. My mom pulled us closer. Please, 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 please. Please stop, I heard her whisper. I don't think calling them would help, my dad said. How would we know when they're the ones at the door? The knocking came back harder than before. The door shook. Then it stopped. After a long moment, I heard the knocking again, but it was coming from our back door. Oh no. We all turned towards the back door, but the knocking immediately returned to the front door. Front to back to front, loud then quiet, then loud again. Suddenly, the sound was coming from both doors at once. Big, heavy blows like a sledgehammer. Then something started rapping against all of the windows in the house, then the walls. It was like we were living inside a drum with a dozen people trying to play at once, or we were a turtle and something was attempting to claw us out of our shell. Stop! Holden yelled. The knocking died. I won't tell, Holden said, staring at the door. I promise I won't tell anyone what I saw. Just please go away. We waited for nearly a minute, then we heard it, a soft tap, 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 coming from the window Holden had looked through earlier. Holden started to cry, sobbing like a prisoner watching gallows being built outside their cell. My dad held him, brushed his hair, but never lied to him, never told him things would be okay. The tapping at the window went on for the rest of the night. We huddled together in the living room for I don't know how long. Eventually, my mom tried to take us kids into my room, while my dad stayed to watch the door, but the second we moved into my bedroom, the knocking came back, so loud it was possible to ignore. I was afraid the door couldn't take it. We went back to the living room, and the knocking stopped. Only the tap, tap, tap on the window remained. None of us slept that night. The tapping stopped around 7 a.m. That's about the time the sun comes up here. We waited another 2 hours before my dad opened the blinds from one window. He made us all go back to my parents' room first. I heard him open the door, then come back in. Okay, he told us, it's done. Holden's parents came back around lunchtime. My mom and dad walked Holden over to his house, and they all went inside for quite a while. Nola and I watched from the window. She stuck to me the whole day, right at my side, sometimes holding my hand. When my parents came back, they looked grim and wouldn't tell us what they said to Holden's family. It was a Sunday, so we all spent the day together, ordered pizza, and watched movies. That night, everyone slept in my room. Nola and my mom in the bed with me. My dad in a chair he'd pulled over. There was no knocking that night, or any night since. We didn't see much of Holden or his parents for the rest of that week, but by Thursday there was a moving truck in their driveway. Nola and I watched them packing up the whole afternoon after school. What sticks with me most is how tired Holden and his parents looked. All three had the same pallor, grim mouths, and lightless eyes. Even from across the street, I could tell something was very wrong. Holden and his family were gone before sunset. I remember what the original welcoming committee said to my parents when we moved in. Not everyone who looks at the Whistler dies, but even those that live had the light go out of them, and the rest of their lives are full of misfortune, a million little tragedies. I think Holden's parents must have looked either to comfort him if they didn't believe, or share the burden if they did. I watched Nola some days, happy and young and alive, and I wonder if I'd been slower if she looked out the window that night. Would I have looked too, to comfort her, to share that burden? I'm glad I don't have to find out. We still live in that house, in that neighborhood. We still hear our Whistler walking past every night. The blessings, the luck, the good things here are too good to leave. But we're careful. We don't have friends over to spend the night anymore. My dad hides the key to the blinds very, very well. Not that I've gone looking. Some things you just don't need to look for. Interesting stuff. That's a very spooky story. I don't understand, why, kids are so stupid in these stories. Because it's don't look, I'm gonna look. It's what is wrong with you? It's I'm glad, I think it was an older sister, that, watched out for Nola. So I'm glad that there was at least one smart person here. So, yeah. I think I'll do, one more story for tonight. I want to read this one, because this is one of my favorite no sleep stories. I'm a search and rescue officer for the U.S. Forest Service. I have some stories to tell. I wasn't sure where else to post these stories, so I'd figured I'd share them here. I've been a SAR officer for a few years now, and along the way I've seen some things that I think you guys will be interested in. I have a pretty good track record for finding missing people. Most of the time they just wander off the path or slip down a small cliff and they can't find their way back. The majority of them have heard the old "stay where you are" thing, and they don't wander far, but I've had 2 cases where that didn't happen. Both bother me a lot, and I use them as motivation to search even harder on the missing persons case I get called on. The first was a little boy who was out berry picking with his parents. He and his sister were together, and both of them went missing around the same time. Their parents lost sight of them for a few seconds, and in that time, both of the kids apparently wandered off. When their parents couldn't find them, they called us, and we came out to search the area. We found the daughter pretty quickly, and when we asked where her brother was, she told us that he'd been taken away by the bear man. She said he gave her berries and told her to stay quiet, that he wanted to play with her brother for a while. The last she saw of her brother, he was riding on the shoulders of the bear man and seemed calm. Of course, our first thought was abduction, but we never found a trace of another human being in that area. The little girl was also insistent that he wasn't a normal man, but that he was tall and covered in hair like a bear, and that he had a weird face. I don't like these images that go into my head. We searched that area for weeks. It was one of the longest calls I've ever been on, but we never found a single trace of that kid. The other was a young woman who was out hiking with her mom and grandpa. According to the mother, her daughter had climbed up to a tree to get a better view of the forest, and she'd never come back down. They waited at the base of the tree for hours, calling her name, before they called for help. Again, we searched everywhere, and we never found a trace of her. I have no idea where she could have possibly gone because neither her mother or grandpa saw her come down. A few times I've been out on my own searching with a canine, and they've tried to lead me straight up cliffs, not hills, not even rock faces, straight sheer cliffs with no possible handholds. It's always baffling, and in those cases we usually find the person on the other side of the cliff or miles away from where the canine had led us. I'm sure there's an explanation, but it's sort of strange. One particularly sad case involved the recovery of a body. A 9-year-old girl fell down an embankment and got impaled on a dead tree at the base. Aww. It was a complete freak accident, and I'll never forget the sound her mother made when we told her what had happened. She saw the body bag being loaded into the ambulance, and she let out the most haunting, heartbroken wail I've ever heard. It was like her whole life was crashing down around her, and a part of her had died with her daughter. I heard from another SAR officer that she killed herself a few weeks after it had happened. She couldn't live with the loss of her daughter. I was teamed up with another SAR officer because we'd received reports of bears in the area. We were looking for a guy who hadn't come home from a climbing trip when he was supposed to, and we ended up having to do some serious climbing to get to where he'd be. We found him trapped in a small crevasse with a broken leg. It was not pleasant. He'd been there for almost 2 days, and his leg was very obviously infected. We were able to get him into a chopper, and I heard from one of the EMTs that the guy was absolutely inconsolable. He kept talking about how he'd been doing fine, and when he got to the top, a man had been there. He said the guy had no climbing equipment, and he was wearing a parka and ski pants. He walked up to the guy, and when the guy turned around, he said he had no face. It was just blank. He freaked out and ended up trying to get off the mountain too fast, which is why he'd fallen. He said he could hear the guy all night climbing down the mountain and letting out these horrible muffled screams. That story bothered the hell out of me. I'm glad I wasn't there to hear it. One of the scariest things I've ever had happen to me involved the search for a young woman who'd gotten separated from her hiking group. We were out until late at night because the dogs had picked up her scent. When we found her, she was curled up in a large rotted log. She was missing her shoes and pack, and she was clearly in shock. She didn't have any injuries, and we were able to get her to walk with us back to base ops. Along the way, she kept looking behind us and asking why that big man with black eyes was following us. We couldn't see anyone, so we just wrote it off as some weird symptom of shock. But the closer we got to base, the more agitated this woman got. She kept asking me to tell him to stop making faces at her, and at one point she stopped and turned around and started yelling into the forest, saying that she wanted him to leave her alone. She wasn't going to go with him, she said, and she wouldn't give us to him. We finally got her to keep moving, but we started hearing these weird noises coming from all around us. It was almost like coughing, but more rhythmic and deeper. It was almost insect-like. I don't really know how else to describe it. When we were within sight of base ops, the woman turns to me and her eyes are about as wide as I can as I can't speak. It's getting late. About as wide as I can imagine a human could open them. She touches my shoulder and says, "He says to tell you to speed up. He doesn't like looking at the scar on your neck." I have a very small scar on the base of my neck, but it's mostly hidden under my collar, and I have no idea how this woman saw it. Right after she says it, I hear that weird coughing right in my ear, and I just about jumped out of my skin. I hustled her to ops, trying not to show how freaked out I was, but I have to say I was really happy when we left that area that night. This is the last one I'll tell, and it's probably the weirdest story I have. Now, I don't know if this is true in every SAR unit, but in mine, it's sort of an unspoken regular thing we run into. You can try asking about it with other SAR officers, but even if they know what you're talking about, they probably won't say anything about it. We've been told not to talk about it by our superiors, and at this point, we've all gotten so used to it that it doesn't seem weird anymore. On just about every case where we're really far into the wilderness, I'm talking 30 or 40 miles, at some point we'll find a staircase in the middle of the woods. It's almost like if you took the stairs in your house, cut them out, and put them in the forest. I asked about it the first time I saw some, and the other officer just told me not to worry about it, that it was normal. Everyone I asked said the same thing. I wanted to go check them out, but I was told very emphatically that I should never go near any of them. I just sort of ignore them now when I run into them because it happens so frequently. I have a lot of more stories, and I suppose if anyone's interested, I'll tell some of them tomorrow. If anyone has any theories about the stairs, or if you've seen them too, let me know.